Welcome back to another episode of Life in the Sands podcast. We have Jake and Zach on the podcast today. We have a good show lined up. We're going to talk about some way too early NBA predictions in a couple different ways, and then also talk about how the NFL season is shaping up because we're in week 13 already, which is crazy to think about. But to start off, Bender, right away, let's jump into some NBA MVP predictions. It's a little bit too early for this, obviously, but interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so I'm going to lead off by saying people are typically going to look at like Joker and Embiid, maybe even Luca this year. I think the name that is at the top of this list currently is Tyrese Halliburton, currently having a 50, 40, 90 season. Let me pull up his averages here: 27 points a game, 4 rebounds a game, 12 assists a game. I think with those numbers and leading the top offense in the NBA currently, they do have defensive struggles. That's why they are losing some games. But I think a player like that leading a bunch of role players in my eyes, like he is the only set superstar on that team. You can argue like Buddy's a very good role player. Bruce Brown was a very good role player on a championship team last year. Miles Turner. But then you got some young guys. Like you got Adam Nembhard. You got a bunch of those guys coming off the bench. Ben Mathurin. He's leading guys who haven't even been in the league very long to being in the top offense of the league. Obi Toppin's pretty young still. I think he's making a difference for that team as well, just with his athleticism in general.
Yep.
Buddy Hield's a good shooter and all, but I think that's what they were missing last year was a little bit more athleticism, and they got it in the offseason with him and Bruce Brown. Um, but we can talk about the Pacers another day. I think just giving credit where credit is due is necessary in the situation. That's also why I think SGA is number two on my list over all those other guys as well.
Very interesting that you bring up SGA because that was going to be my pick. I was going to say SGA in sort of the same light that you're talking about. You know, people are going to talk about Embiid. They're going to talk about Jokic. They're going to talk about maybe even Giannis, like you said, maybe Luca this year. I'm kind of tired of it. Kind of tired of hearing the same names. And I know it's, by the end of the season, I'm sure this will all get shaked up again. But you look at what the Thunder are doing, they're a competitive team. Chet's coming back this year, and they have a lot of interesting pieces there. But Shea is most definitely the core. Shea is most definitely the guy there, and he's what makes a lot of that run and fit together. So I think he's, in the same way you talk about the Pacers being young and sort of upstart and starting to fit some pieces together, and Tyrese Halliburton being the center of all that, the crux of all that, that kind of make that he's like making it go right now. I feel like Shea's in the same position. Like he's kind of the center of it all. He's kind of like making that team go a little bit. But I mean, if you wanted to get really, really out there, you could talk about Tyrese Maxey as an MVP candidate because he was on the MVP ladder for a little bit to start the season, which I think is like kind of funny, honestly. But yeah, I mean, I hope that an MVP though, at least this year, goes to someone new. I hope there's not uh, a multiple time winner that's winning it again. I'd even throw like Anthony Edwards into the mix right now.
I want to change that thought and say I just want to see it go back to a guard for a year.
Yeah, that's true too.
Yeah.
Very true too.
Going
Yeah.
going along with the SGA talk, a lot of people last year thought that SGA was performing the way he was, and even the year before because he was the only guy. But now he has help this year with Chet and like J Dub, even Lou
Yep.
Dort's contributing. I think he's their best defender on that team personally. Um, but now that he actually has help and he's still putting up numbers and they're winning now, I think people need to start thinking a little differently.
Hmm.
I don't like how they try to stick with the same narrative they start with. I think things always change, and I think the
Yep.
media kind of gets that twisted.
Yeah, I think it's a good point too. The narrative has changed for sure. And Shea has really like grown up with that team because when he first got traded there, it was after coming from the Clippers in that huge Paul George deal. And yeah, like no one really expected the Thunder to be that competitive. I feel like people still see the Thunder as that team with like Shea in the first year there with Chris Paul. And like that is
Yeah.
not the Thunder team that exists anymore. It's very, very different. A lot of youth, a lot of good wing defenders, a lot of length. So yeah, I mean, I think it's very different, and Shea has definitely grown into that role, and people do need to give him more credit for that. But similarly to the Pacers, I would say in that regard with Tyrese Halliburton, he got traded to the Pacers. People looked at it and said, "Ah, yeah, give them a couple of years. They're not quite ready yet." It's been a couple of years. What do you think now? You got to revisit all that. So I think it's definitely interesting. Yeah, I hope a young guard wins it. It'd be interesting to see. I put Anthony Edwards, Shea, Tyrese Halliburton, all those guys into that mix, kind of.
I will say, you mentioning Maxi's a little bit of pushing it on that. But
Oh, for sure. But he was like fifth in MVP ladder, like 10 games into the season.
yeah,
Like it was
again,
Embiid
this is
two
what,
and Maxi fifth, and it's like, come on, man.
but this is why it's a way too early prediction, right? So like we're
Right.
talking about 10 games. For Halliburton, it's 16 games. That's why it's a way too early prediction.
For
Um,
sure.
you have to determine health and all that at the end of the year. They did put like
Yeah.
a minimum game number to the MVP voting this year. So
Yeah.
there's a chance like Embiid misses a lot of time and doesn't get there. Like,
Yeah. Which, by the way, though, at the start of the season, do you think it's made a difference? Because I haven't really heard much about load management or guys resting, or I feel like it's been a little more back to the way it was. I don't like. I feel like everyone's playing.
I wouldn't say that because there are guys that are still resting, like Zion is still resting every now and then. And I think Embiid even rested the other night against the Pelicans. So I
Hmm.
think there's a time and a place, but we'll see how much teams decide to rest players towards the end of the season.
Yeah,
Because that's when it'll really show. At the beginning of the year, you want your team there to kind of like build some kind of continuity. New Sixers
that's
team,
true.
new
Yep.
Pelicans team because Zion's actually playing. I
Yep.
know I just mentioned Zion and Embiid. That's why I mentioned those two teams. But
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think it's important for teams to have their players early on.
That makes sense too. Yeah, they built the chemistry in the beginning of the season, but then as the season goes on, it's like, yeah, I'm gonna take this night off. It'll be really interesting though too to see like with 15 to 20 games left. I'm sure a lot of conversations are gonna start happening where it's like, hey man, like you might like these three players as MVP candidates, but they're not gonna hit the threshold for games even if they play every other game this season. It doesn't matter, right? So
For
it's going to
sure.
be really interesting to see. I'm sure there's going to be a guy that has played 63 games and is probably just as deserving of the MVP, if not more, than the guy who played 67 games, and it's going to be the difference. So it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, we'll see.
Moving on, though, let's jump into another set of way too early predictions, unless you have anything to share about MVPs.
Mm-mm.
So
Nope.
let's make some more super early, way too early, obnoxiously early predictions for the NBA Finals. Who are your two
Uh,
teams?
I have the Mavs and the Celtics. Um,
Okay, okay.
so Luca and Kyrie kind of turned a switch at the beginning of this season. Again, way too early. But I think it makes a difference. They're actually like winning. Last year when Kyrie first got traded to the Mavs, you didn't see that. Um, they have Hardy, they have Hardaway off the bench, like so they have extra scoring to go with them. Um, I like Lively, who's their rookie center. He's playing pretty well. He doesn't get a lot of time
Hmm.
just because that's how the league has transitioned, and you want kind of like stretch bigs around Luca and Kyrie with the way they play.
Right.
Um, they tend to run a 5-out style because Luca likes to kick out on ISOs.
Hmm.
Um, so I think their offense just gives them a chance to carry themselves in a 7-game series. Um, Going with the Celtics, it's more because other teams look bad. I'm not going to say it's because of the way the Celtics look. The Milwaukee Bucks don't really look like they should with Dame on their team. They just lost to the
Yeah.
Chicago Bulls last night
Yeah.
with a full team without DeRozan and Levine playing that in that game.
Hmm.
That game went to OT. I think they lost by 7. I know it's just one instance, but they just haven't seemed to find a groove yet. Maybe that changes later in the season where they do click. Again, way too early. I think the Sixers are a pretty solid team right now. I think we're the one team that could probably scare the Celtics, but yet again, the Celtics always have our number, and they added better pieces for their starting lineup. When it
Hmm.
comes to a playoff series, you don't play more than 7 or 8 guys in a playoff series anyway.
Yep.
So you can't even talk about the Celtics' depth. And guys like Hauser and Pritchard have stepped up off their bench. So you can't even go at them for that like we were at the beginning of the season. Heat or nothing. Pacers are good and promising, but they won't be anything until probably 2-ish years from now. Like I'm happy they're a playoff team, but they still need at least one more piece, I think, to go with Halliburton. Um, there's extra teams that you don't see it. You might see the Knicks go after Donovan Mitchell because the Cavs are struggling.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of things in the East going on. With the West, it is a little bit more competitive. So me saying the Mavs is kind of like out there. Um,
Hmm.
because the Nuggets pretty much have their same team minus Bruce Brown.
Right.
Warriors are pretty solid every year. Kings are the same team basically.
Yep.
Um, Again, we can talk more about this during trade deadline because I think that is where things also change up. Because you'll see the Bulls shop all those players, and I think guys like DeRozan and Levine can make people championship contenders. One example before I hand it off to you here. Um,
Mm,
I heard a rumor about Zach LaVine maybe getting traded to the Kings. Um,
mm.
yeah, so I think that would definitely help them out. I think they need somebody else other than Fox to score the ball. Like Sabonis is a stat sheet guy, but he's not exactly like the guy that's going to drop 30.
Yeah.
Um, and I think he showed that in the playoffs last year. So a lot of question marks, a lot of things going on. Again, way too early predictions. So that's exactly why I'm bringing up all the scenarios. Um,
Yeah.
but I guess we'll see what you think here. We'll go from there.
Yeah, I mean that's what makes it fun, right? Is the fact that it is way too early because you can't really argue with any of that, right? Like that could
Yeah.
all happen, And I'm going to probably talk about seven different things that could all happen too. So yeah, I mean it's part of the fun of it. And the Zach Levine thing is interesting. I'll touch on that just before I get into my predictions. Which by the way, I have Pistons Spurs in the finals. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh,
Um, but no, I think I saw a GM in the NBA talk about Zach Levine's level of winning and if he would actually translate to a winning culture in the NBA, like if he actually pushes a title contender over the top. And I think it's an interesting conversation. Like if you want to talk about SGA as a stat sheet guy who's just playing on a bad team, Zach Levine's been that his whole career. The Bulls have never been good while he's been there. He's played in one playoff series and he got swept. So
yeah,
like I look at Zach Levine and I'm like, man, I mean, I get the stats, like I get the eye test of hey, this guy looks like he could help a championship contender. But then I look at the track record and I'm like, I don't know if he really does. So that's an interesting conversation we could have all beside the point. Because I see you making faces and I know that you
you
have
got me
thoughts on
rolling
that.
up here. You got me
Yeah, you
rolling
have
here.
thoughts on that. But so my actual NBA finals predictions though to jump into this, I mean it's hard to argue with what you say. I'm gonna go a little out there. I'm gonna say Suns and Bucks. A little bit older teams, but I look at Giannis and Dame, and I don't think they have it figured out yet. I don't think Middleton is really himself even still. So, and Brooke Lopez is awesome. The dude is great. Like he deserves more credit on that Bucks team than he gets. You still got Bobby Portis there. Like you have other like the Bucks are still a really solid team. I think they need more time, and it feels like the year where everyone looks at the Bucks and it was like, yeah, no, like not their year, new pieces, like they're older, and they come out and they make the finals. Like it feels like that year, like it feels like the year when everyone started doubting Giannis, and then Giannis went and won the chip, right? So that's kind of what it feels like to me, and that's why I say the Bucks. And then for the Suns, I say the Suns because I think getting rid of Aiton and bringing in Nurkic is actually a way better fit for them. And I think they're in the same boat where like they're going to rest guys. They're going to probably not be a finished product until way later in the season. But it's hard to look at a team with Devin Booker, KD, all those wing pieces, and Beal, freaking Bradley Beal, who hasn't even actually played a game with them yet or whatever. Like it's hard to imagine that team. Talk about Western Conference offenses that are going to show a lot of firepower in the playoffs and maybe could carry them. That seems like I mean you got three scorers there that could go for 50
Yeah,
at any moment. So
you got me rolling on something. You got me rolling on Levine, and now you got me rolling on the Nurkic talk. I think the one thing that the NBA values anymore is young players. But I would like to go out and say, like, I wish there was some research that I did before this. I'd like to know on championship teams in the
mm,
last couple of years. I want to know how many like 5 to 7 year plus veterans are on each championship team.
yeah, like
Uh,
what's the average age?
yeah, because like
I know.
it's one of those
Yeah,
things where like I think Aiton and Nurkic are equals, but they traded Aiton in that because he's the young piece and got a lot out of that trade. Um,
right. And
it's
got
just
way better contracts.
yeah, it's just very confusing. Because you can still win a championship with him, is my thought. Like you can win a championship without Aiton. Aiton is not he's just not that guy. There's some players in the league that I just think are way too overhyped. Jason Tatum. Um, but like there's guys like that that I just don't think are like that, and I just don't know. I'd have to look into that. The Levine thing is still in my head just because. Um, and I'll keep it short. So like there's coaches that are meant for players. I think if he went to the Kings, I think Mike Brown would have him under wraps and kind of have him mature a little bit because I feel like Zach LaVine never had that time to mature. I think he was involved in the Jimmy Butler trade originally going to
Mm,
Minnesota,
gotcha.
um, and then
Yeah.
was on a losing team, um, on a winning team with that initial group when Lonzo was healthy. Lonzo getting hurt kind of killed their chances of anything. And not to say that Kobe White and all those guys aren't solid role players, but they're also not Lonzo Ball.
No,
Um, and I hope he gets back in the league soon. Which it sounds like
for real.
LaMelo wants to play with Lonzo because LaMelo wants Lonzo to get traded to the Hornets, but that's another conversation.
Yeah,
Um,
dude. Whole other conversation is prayers up for Lonzo because that dude needs to get back on the basketball court.
yeah, for sure. But yeah, I think certain players need to be matched up with certain coaches to be able to
Yeah.
progress.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Um, and again, goes to the nature of these way too early predictions. A lot can happen in the NBA season yet, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I did do a little bit of quick research as you were talking about the average age of NBA Finals championship teams, and
Okay.
according to NBA Reddit, the average age of the last 24 um, championship teams is 28.7. So on average, your average age on a championship team in the NBA is 29 years old.
Yeah. So
That
then
that means
here's the other part.
you probably got guys that are 35 and you probably got guys that are 22, to be honest.
Yeah, and because of if you look at people in their prime, and MJ is actually a good example of this. Those guys are usually like between 25 and 30. So if your
Yep.
superstars are between 25 and 30, and then you have the veterans, that obviously bumps the age gap. But
Hmm.
think about it. So I know KD's a little bit older. You can count him as the veteran. Nurkic is a veteran, and then Book is young, and even Bradley Beal, I bet, is 30 by now, or at least close to it.
Right,
Um,
right.
I think you
Yep.
can win with guys that are 30 plus years old. You don't need to trade for
Hmm.
Aiton, who's like 24.
Right, because he's not there yet anyway. Like, what are you trading for? Like, why are you paying that for? And yeah, as
Yeah,
I'm looking at this, like the youngest age, the youngest average age of a championship team, 1980 Lakers, 25.3 years old.
exactly.
The beginning of the Showtime Lakers is the youngest average team to ever win a championship.
Exactly. I
And
feel
you're
like there's
telling me
too much
that's yeah, yeah, I think you're
there's
right.
too much pressure on young superstars anymore. Um, which is also a part of why I think Tatum's overrated because they pushed that narrative since he came out of school. Um, but they
It's a
expected
good
him to
point.
carry a team right out of school. You don't do that. You just don't
Right.
do it in this league. Not at all.
Right. I think for me that just confirms that idea that like yeah, like I mean youth you like you need youth. You need like think back to the Miami Heat days, right? Like or the Warriors championship runs. Like you need the Kamingas or the Andrew Wiggins or the even I would say like Dwayne and Bosh were the older guys and LeBron was the sort of like young meat on that team. But even LeBron on that team was what 26, 25, 26. And
Well,
D
yeah, I
Wade
was
and
gonna,
Bosh were probably pushing 30, maybe over. So like
yeah, I was
you
gonna say,
need all those pieces.
making one more point off of a team you mentioned, think about who won an MVP. Andre Iguodala won an MVP as a veteran.
Right.
Not to say, because some people don't think he deserved it, which I think he did. If you actually watched and like went
Yeah.
based off of the eye test, I think he deserved it. Um, just because of the hype of LeBron, somebody finally figured it out. Um, but yeah, I just think you need veterans. You need a good mix. Maybe not just straight up
Yeah.
veterans, but you need a good mix.
Yeah.
And I just don't think your superstars, now that you need two or three nowadays, if you have two of them being young guys, you're not looking good based off of
Yeah.
what you just looked up. So
Yeah. And look at the track record of that in real life too. I mean, if you just stuck with the Sixers and the Celtics, you got Tatum and Brown that are still there. You had Simmons and Embiid at one point, and all of that talk about what was going to happen. And it's like, man, it's just they're too young. They were just all way too young.
for sure. I'm glad we talked about all this just because this gives us more to talk about, especially approaching trade deadline and
Mhm.
towards the end of the season whenever we get there. 16 games in, I don't think we're going to talk about that anytime soon. But I think this gives us a lot to think about. But with that said, I'm actually going to transition us to the NFL. Um, and we're going to start with a pretty sensitive topic. And we've brought this up before. I'm actually going to ask you, your early thoughts on the Steelers after the Canada firing. First, was it 400-yard game and however long, and it was the first game without Canada. So I'm going to lead you off with that little stat there and see what you say.
It was 58 games, if you want the number. And I know the number because I painstakingly watched 58 games of a high school offense being rolled out into Acrisure Stadium. You you don't wish for anyone to like lose their job, right? So I think that needs to be first said first and foremost, right? Like everything that came out of the Steelers building about Matt Canada said that he was like a stand-up guy, family man, like all those kinds of things, right? So like hopefully Matt Canada is doing well. And like you don't wish for anyone to be fired. That being said, Matt Canada is an awful NFL offensive coordinator. He might have had a lot of success in college. He's not good at being the Steelers offensive coordinator. He's not good at being an NFL offensive coordinator. You can bring up a myriad of stats to showcase that, right? 58 games without a 400-yard game. I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous. And then if you tell me our team goes out the very next week and puts up 428, and the very first play from scrimmage, we run a play action seam for 25 yards in the middle of the field, and Kenny Pickett just rips it between two linebackers, dropping into a cover three. I do not like something was vastly wrong with what was going on in that system. Something was vastly wrong. The energy was wrong. The play calling, like whatever it was vastly wrong. It needed to shake up. I mean, other stats you could mention. I mean, you just look at George Pickens' production. You look at the fact that Deontay hasn't gotten in the end zone. You can look at the fact that Kenny Pickett is the worst performing quarterback statistically, maybe ever, in the National Football League in terms of touchdown production.
Yeah.
So, like, all of that goes to say, like, the first game without him being there, yeah, it looked a lot better. Like, I saw, again, first play action, steam rip. I saw on a 3rd and 1, we had both Najee and Jalen Warren in the backfield together, which I feel like I've been harping on. I'd like to see them on the field together. Put them in the backfield together. You run a little like fake fullback dive to Najee, and you motion Warren out into the flat on a motion on the same play. And Kane does like a little like spin and throws out. Like pick up the first down, and it's easy because of the play call and the design. And I'm like, where like you didn't make that play up in 1 week. That was in the system, but it wasn't called ever. Right. So I mean, there's obviously legitimate issues there. Hopefully it's a better sign for the Steelers. It feels like there's a renewed sense of energy and confidence in the building. I hope Canada goes on to to find his next gig and is happy and successful and ever, but it was definitely not a good fit. Now that being said, with the Steelers in the playoffs, to think about the Steelers being competitive in the playoffs, this is the kind of Steelers team that is scary to play, but not hard to beat. And what I mean by that is the idea of this Steelers team on paper seems like it would be a playoff dominant team. They've run for the most yards in the NFL over the last 3 or 4 weeks. Najee and Jalen Warren have, in the offensive line have like really grown together. I mean, we're putting up 200 plus yard rushing games consistently over the past month or so. Kenny Pickett looks like he has an ounce of confidence back because he doesn't have Uncle Canada over his shoulder. Like, I don't, makes me. Did you ever see the clip of them on the sideline where they're both sitting on the sideline and Matt Canada is like reaching over trying to show him a tablet, and Kenny is literally leaned over looking away from him, and it's like a 30-second video where like Matt Canada is explaining something and Kenny Pickett is just. I mean, it might be the most checked out I've ever seen anyone. Like he was just not having it. So I mean, like in theory, with that firing and the offense doing what it's doing, and then like Minka's coming back. The Steelers defense has dealt with a lot of injuries this year. The only constant has been TJ Watt, right? Hayward's been gone, Minka's been gone. Both of our starting inside linebackers got hurt. We had to bring in Mykal Walker from the Falcons off their practice squad, who has actually played decently, but like, come on. So the all of that to say, do I really think they have a shot in the playoffs? Only in one circumstance. And that one circumstance that I think they might have a shot in the playoffs is if they get a home playoff game to start, which is not out of the question because the Steelers have one of the easiest remaining schedules in the AFC. And the Ravens, the team that's above them in the division right now, has one of the hardest remaining schedules. The Steelers have already beaten the Ravens and they play one more time. So the only way that I think the Steelers have a legitimate shot is right now they're the 5 seed in the AFC. It's wild to think about that. They just had their first game of the entire season where they outgained their opponent. I'm going to say that they just had their first game of the entire season last week where they actually outgained their opponent. And it was because the Burrows trotted out Jake Browning onto the field.
Yeah, that's terrible. Um,
So no, I like unless the Steelers get that first playoff game at home, which they'd have to probably finish 11-6 or 12-5, and they probably have to beat the Ravens in that remaining game, and they probably end up with like a three seed, maybe a 2 seed if it's really lucky, just because the
yeah.
remaining schedule is so easy. But then like beyond that first home playoff game, when you put them against the Dolphins, the Chiefs, the Bills, I don't see it. I don't see them being competitive against those teams.
Okay. Well, a bunch of different thoughts. Um, I'm gonna fire up this conversation. One of our first episodes that y'all been following, we talked about a certain tight end. So I 58 games, right? So there's a lot on paper that way.
Yep.
But I do think Fryermuth coming back made a difference, just because I think that's Kenny Pickett's guy. Um,
Hmm.
like I think that is his main target. If you look at last year, even um, I think Pickens needs the ball more. I'm not a big fan of Deontay Johnson.
Trade
Um,
him.
yeah, I'm gonna stay on that train and say trade him as well.
Yeah.
I think Pickens is your number one. You obviously need more than just one receiver. But I think Fryermuth coming back kind of gave him that little dump off option and that down the seam option, as you mentioned, the
Yep.
25 yarder. Um, but I also think the pass game opened up more because they were confusing the defense with the Warren Najee combo. Um, I feel like they were trying to run Warren like up the middle and Najee to the outside with Canada, when it should be like the complete opposite way around. And that just wasn't figured out till we knew he was going to get fired. It was just like the ticking time bomb of when.
Yeah. Right.
Um, so like you figured it out a little bit too late, buddy. But um, another thought, since we're talking about the playoff picture, um, I think you guys would have a chance against the Dolphins for how crazy that sounds. Tua showed that he doesn't do well against pass rush. If you watch the Eagles game, they had 10 offensive points out of the 17. Um, and just did not handle pressure very well. And the Eagles have one of the best defenses in the league. Um, but I want to see the Dolphins against the Cowboys later this season, because if they can't handle our pass rush, who's to say if they get matched up with the Steelers, they're not going to get blown out of the water like that either.
True.
So I think that might be Tua's kryptonite on that. It is a hard cover for Tyreek Hill, um, but I think that is the one team outside of your division that you could beat in the playoffs. Um, and to address something else, I heard you mention the Bills. Um, I don't have the Bills making the playoffs. The Bills still have to play us, as in the Cowboys as well. Like their schedule
Hmm.
does not look very, very hot.
Yep.
This is how I have the playoff picture looking. I don't have who's going to be what seed. I just have the seven teams. Um, I have Jags, Chiefs, Ravens, and Dolphins winning their divisions. And then I have the wild card teams for the rest of the year. I have the Texans and Broncos sliding in there, and the
Mm.
Steelers staying in the wild card spot. Now,
Interesting.
which wild cards, which division leaders get what seeds? I don't know. Jags currently hold the number one seed, get the first week bye. Um, but I have
Mm.
Texans, Broncos, and Steelers as the wild cards, and then the obvious ones are in there for division winners.
Texans, Broncos, and Steelers. It's crazy to me that after what the beginning of the season, you're going to put Broncos in there.
For sure. I believe at the beginning of the season, I thought they were also going to be better than what they were to start the season. Um,
It's also
I saw
fair.
something, obviously joking around, right? But um, the Dolphins put up 70 on them in the last,
Hmm.
I forget how many weeks. Ever since then, they only let up 80 in how
Yeah.
many weeks? So
Right.
their defense is looking different. I think Russell Wilson is looking different and not
Yep.
trying to do too much. And that's opened up by their run game. So I kind of think they're playing the way the Steelers are going to start playing. Um, with the new offense, just because that's typically how it is. You run the ball and play
Yeah.
defense, and it opens up big plays.
Right.
So,
Yeah. And I mean, one thing that I think isn't unknown at this point is, I mean, you do have a new offensive coordinator in there. And I mean, it is the NFL, right? Like the Steelers could go into Arrowhead and they could just sack Mahomes 8 times and run for 220 yards and win a game 13-7. And that seems like entirely unreasonable right now, but it's yeah, I mean it's the NFL. And if you look at it, the Steelers are only one loss behind the number one seed in the AFC.
mhm.
So they're 7-4, and they got there handicapped the whole year, from my perspective. So if you look at it in that way, it's like you're 7-4, you were handicapped the whole time. What happens the rest of the season when you take off that handicap? Does it entirely do the wheels entirely fall off and does it break, or does the handicap get taken off and you drive better?
I mean, you're
I
right
don't
to a
know.
point. You're right to a point because there are injuries with every team. Um, Maybe not as significant as you think they are just because of Hayward and Fitzpatrick, right? Um, but like if you think about the Chiefs, they're missing Chris Jones and Travis Kelce to start the year, at least in the
Right.
Lions game. Um, so that could have been their and like another win.
Yep.
Not to take away from the Lions, but um, we can get into the NFC here in a second. But
Yeah,
um, yeah,
definitely.
I just think if you think about it, the Broncos pulled one out against the Chiefs. You're saying it might look unreasonable right now. I don't know. The Chiefs don't look the same. The Jaguars are
Yeah.
inconsistent. We talked about that, or at least I talked about this last week about um, the AFC being just all over the place.
Right.
So I think it's a wide open AFC, and you got like three-ish teams in the NFC. So
Yeah, I think honestly, yeah. I mean, you talk about the playoff picture in the AFC. I'm not going to go as far to say like the Texans or the Broncos as a bubble team are going to go in there and upset a top AFC team, but it could happen. Like I could see CJ Stroud going toe to toe with Mahomes right now with the way he's playing with all
or
those
what happens?
young
What happens if
young
Houston
receivers.
gets Jacksonville second round?
Yeah, right. Then it's a divisional game. But either way, I guess what I'm saying is you mentioned like three teams maybe in the NFC. Maybe it's like Cowboys, Niners, Eagles. Maybe Lions are that fourth team right now if they can really be consistent. But beyond that, you don't really have much. But
Yeah,
like the AFC, all seven teams that make it could make a run,
for sure.
depending on how the matchups go. Yeah.
And like I didn't have them in here, but what happens if the Bills make playoffs?
Hmm.
It
Yeah, and I
all it
mentioned
takes is
them,
one
right?
all it takes is one good run in the playoffs.
Yep.
If they play the way they played against Philly, I know Josh Allen threw another pick, but um, even if he plays the way he did, their defense has to step up. You don't just let up 30 plus
Hmm.
points.
Yep.
It's like the Cowboys, right? Like we just let up how many points last night to the Seahawks, which
Right.
I think is an unfair conversation. That'll get me fired up. I don't want to talk about that.
You don't want to talk
Um,
about DK? You don't want to talk about DK Metcalf?
no, I just don't want to talk about how we had two bad games on defense all year, and then people were saying, "Is that our weak point in winning the Super Bowl?" Like, get get off of our wieners, dude. Um, anyway, but yeah, I don't. This is gonna sound disrespectful, but like, yeah, we have those four teams in the NFC that we keep bringing up, and then it doesn't matter if the Falcons win their division. It doesn't matter who the wild card teams are; they aren't going anywhere.
Yeah.
Like maybe the Seahawks can win a game, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
but I mean, like right now, your wild card teams are like they're probably going to be some combination of like Vikings, Packers, Rams, Saints.
Yeah, exactly. So like
So what?
in
Like, yeah, man. Like, no.
just the inconsistency in the wild card area. Like
Yeah,
NFC has powerhouses. The AFC has what Tom Brady likes to call like I forget something mediocrity. Like I don't know.
yeah. Plagued by mediocrity. Did you see the
Something.
response to that actually? Who responded to him?
Alex Smith said something about
That is
playing in
Alex
the
Smith.
in the weakest division in
Yeah.
history. Yeah,
I mean, I agree with that.
he's not wrong. Yeah,
I agree with
really not
that.
wrong.
No, he's
Um,
not at all. I mean, maybe
but
it's
yeah,
just because Tom Brady was that good, but didn't I don't think the other three teams in those divisions, like I'd be curious to see how like what percentage of the time any other team in Tom Brady's division had a winning record at the end of the season.
yeah, and I guess you could actually look at his time with the Bucks too, with the Falcons, Saints, like and Panthers, because they weren't very good either.
Right.
He jumped right into a crappy division. Um,
Yeah. See,
but
yeah.
yeah,
Right to the
that's
Bucks. From
a whole other thing, man.
so, what do you think about Bill Belichick then? Is it time for him to go?
Oh, he's gone. There, I think I saw something. There's expected to be at least like 8 coaching changes this year, and that's like almost a quarter of the league, if not more. Um,
And can you believe that Steelers fans want Mike Tomlin to be one of those guys?
that's I don't agree with that at all.
Silly,
I think
silly.
no, but one last comment I want to make is more about the NFC because I had the Lions making the conference championship game and kind of like sneaking in there, and I'm still going to stick with that. I think their turnover struggles in the 2 week period is just kind of a phase.
Yeah.
Thanksgiving
Middle of
Day,
the season, whatever.
adrenaline's up. The Packers were probably a little excited because they finally got a TV game. Um, like all that kind of stuff plays in, but
Yeah.
I'm not too worried about the Lions as much as other people are. I feel like there's not a lot to talk about in the NFL right now because everybody is so inconsistent. So when they can grab onto anything that's close to a headline, they will stomp you down a little bit.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I agree. Yeah. We can wrap up here. But yeah, I mean, I tend to agree. I think that it seems really consistent all over the place this year. I mean, you look at the top teams in the NFL and like the Eagles have the best record at 10-1, and they have not looked good. Like the Eagles have
yeah,
not looked good, right? Like if you talk to any Eagles fan, they say they've been trashed this year. And they're 10-1 and they're the best team in the NFL by record. So it's like
yeah,
I just think from top to bottom. And then meanwhile, you also have the Bills who could very well win it all at 6-6.
yeah.
Like they could still make a run and win it all. So yeah, I mean, it's been so inconsistent. It's been so hard to judge. So many surprises. The Panthers suck. Frank Reich has been fired. CJ Stroud is horrible in his testing, but he's the best rookie QB we've ever seen. Mahomes sucks
The testing
more
is
than he
some
ever has.
BS. That
Yeah, I mean,
testing is some BS, dude.
yeah, injuries everywhere. People going down. Rodgers not actually being on the Jets and somehow talking like he's going to come back from a torn Achilles this year. The NFL is so weird this year.
Mm, that
Yeah,
conversation irks me.
yeah, I just opened up a whole nother can of worms from
Just
Dr.
don't
Bender.
just don't come back, dude. Just don't come back that soon. Like Cam Akers just tore his Achilles again. What are we talking about? He did the same like accelerated rehab and tore it again, playing for the Vikings. Like Aaron Rodgers, you're like 50,000 years old. Chill out, dude. Like a young guy just tore it. You're not that young anymore. Like mm, playoff probabilities down. Don't do it. But we are going to wrap up here. We're going to keep you updated on playoffs. That's coming up shortly. It is week 13 already, like you said. So we'll keep you updated on NFL playoffs, more NBA predictions and headlines, and we'll see you next time.